Good morning, everybody. Got your self shift crew back for a early Sunday morning. It's actually a very sunny Sunday morning here in November. You got Patrick here, Derek,
Hey, Derek here. Good morning, everyone.
Doug.
Hello.
All right, Doug is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning. So we've got an interesting theme that we're going to talk through this morning. Choose to take risks, embrace the newness. So does anybody have a good quote they want to start off with? I've got one, but I'm going to give other people the option to go first.
I have one I'll jump in with from John F. Kennedy. Says there are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long range risk of comfortable inaction.
Helen
Gotcha.
Keller has a good one for us. She says, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all.
Two really good ones. I'll just say this. Growth doesn't come from certainty. It comes from deliberate, structured exposure to the unfamiliar. We don't stumble into the best version of ourselves. We choose it, and choosing requires a risk. Let's jump in. All right. I think, Derek, this was maybe one that you had been wanting to record on for a while. So do you have any additional opening thoughts you'd like to kick us off with?
Well, I think that everything that we, aspire to in our life, in the adventure of life and the journey of life, I mean, down various paths, leads us to somewhere, right? To a destination. And along that path, there's risk. There's decisions that come up, based on the lived experience and things that come up in life, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. At that point in time, there's a decision we make, and in those decisions, it leads us to a destination, and that destination is sometimes can be pleasant, often hopefully, or it can be negative, and not so good. So, I think that one of the things that comes with all this is risk. It's like taking money and it's in like investing it. There's a risk to that. You could lose that money, but you could also gain a lot of money. So, the risk of living life is there, and so it's about you navigating that risk and finding the path that you want to go down by the actions you need to take that delivers the outcome that you want to have.
Yep, that makes sense. And I'll double click on that a little bit. And I'm going to amend the quote I said earlier because I like there's a slightly different version of it that I think resonates with me at least a little bit more. And this is your future self isn't waiting to be discovered. It's waiting to be built, and construction requires uncertainty. I'm not sure who said that quote. I'm certainly not taking credit for it, but it resonates with me in the sense that, for much of my life, I was very averse to risk, right? Steady corporate job, just kind of playing by the rules. And I'm still a rule follower, but for the most part, was averse to taking risk. Had an epiphany probably 10 years ago, right? Sitting at my desk in the office building, thinking that, Patrick, if you don't do something differently, if you don't start taking some risk, expose yourself to new things, you're going to be sitting in the same cube for the next 20 years doing the same exact thing, right? And I thought about that over time and decided to, actually explore things and discover things that would not necessarily be natural for me to do as it relates to exploring other options outside of corporate America. Doing some different types of exercises and those types of things that I'd always wanted to do, but, just didn't feel like it was part of the personality that I had. So as I was, you know, understanding or visualizing my future self, then piecing in what did I need to do to get there. So that part of it, I know because risk is humans are naturally risk averse, right? Again, we talk about it on the channel quite a bit. If you look at evolutionary biology, we are designed from a neuroscience perspective to survive, not to necessarily to be happy or take risks. And back when we were living, on the savannas and living in caves and stuff like that, taking a risk could potentially be extremely harmful. So I get it. Getting the power and the resolution to overcome that type of thing has been really beneficial to me. And once you start taking a few risks, I'm not saying go too crazy, it becomes easier, right? As you see that not everything is catastrophic if you fail, right? You're going to fail on certain things. That's okay. That's called learning. Doug,
Yeah, I think there's, building on your point there is like there's different points in your life where you do self reflection, or for whatever reason, you just kind of do an evaluation to say, am I where I think I should be? Am I happy with where I'm at? Those kind of things occur. Like I think with me, I'm always sort of evaluating myself, going back to self-compassion and other things, and I'm also kind of a harsher judge on myself, I think. But when you're doing that, when you take the time to step back and think about, like, am I in a lot of routines, and are the routines really growing me, or are they just maintaining me? Am I really experiencing any growth or anything like that? Like, you have to kind of put your thoughts into, am I just staying in my comfort zone? And if I'm staying in my comfort zone, what's the risks of that? And the risks is I don't learn anything new. I don't have new experiences. I mean, I think one of the things we talked about somewhere along the way is, like, life is really that, when you try to value your life and you value what you've done with your life, a lot of it is going to be about the experiences with family, the experience going on different trips and all that. And a lot of that has to do with getting out of your comfort zone and doing something that's not the routine, and exposing yourself to more things. And it's inherently risky. Like, for example, I've not been a great traveler. Like, so there was a period in my mid 20s and things I avoided travel. I didn't really, I felt like things can happen when you travel. And so my comfort zone was staying home. But, since then, going on trips with family, going on even work trips to new cities I've never been to, I've enjoyed it more and more, and it's grown into something I like more and more. And again, it was all about getting out of my comfort zone. It's all about exposing myself to things, which includes risks and things like that, and just and seeking the experience and the value over the risk.
Got it. Derek, tell us about a time you took a risk. You went into the newness, some of the awkwardness of taking risks, and tell me one that worked out well and maybe one that didn't.
Okay, so the first one would be a very risky thing that I did when I flew up to 18,000 feet to skydive. And so I was up there at 18,000 feet, gonna jump out of a plane strapped to someone with a parachute. And I was hoping and praying that the parachute would open. And so in that adventure, though, it didn't prevent me from jumping because I had arrived at a space in my life where I had a confidence and a faith over fear that the parachute was going to open. So I jumped. And so I think that would be more of a fun adventure thing. But on a personal front, I think that going through life's traumas and woundings, and coming to a space after 20 years of being in a marriage, evaluating things that had happened in that relationship to deteriorate it, I had to make a decision on my personal front to not choose the marriage anymore and to end it. And that was a very hard decision to make. And it took a lot of time and processing and reflecting and getting myself into a healthy state. I think that's a key point there. Getting myself into a healthy state to be able to make that decision and not make it in a reaction or an upset or an anger or a frustration, but making it in a healthy, positive state versus a negative state and taking that risk from that perspective.
Yep, no, those are good examples. I'm going to give a really simple one, because it's debatable whether this was a risk. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it's a good example of at least taking a small step forward, exposing yourself and doing something that uh, is outside of your comfort zone. And this goes back, I'm probably showed it in other videos that we've done, is historically I've had, a fear of public speaking, right? Not in the last, 35 years or so, but I can remember when I was in school, the thought of having to talk in front of the class or go out on a stage and speak in front of people was simply terrifying to me, right? And so as I got, older and realized that I actually did want to be somebody that could publicly speak or do public speaking, I started taking risks and volunteering, in college and other things to be the public speaker for the group or whatever, or even in my employment, like, yeah, I'll speak for the group and that type of thing. And again, it was kind of putting yourself out there. I know that's, not super putting yourself out there, but for me, it was a big step. And the benefit that I got over time is I actually got what I would consider to be pretty good at it, right? So I would get in the habit of being open to being the speaker for the group or giving public talks or whatever, or doing presentations or webinars for technology and that type of thing from an industry perspective, from an IT perspective. And so it actually became, as opposed to a risk, it became almost a certainty to me, not a certainty, but very comfortable for me to give talks, which I've had to adjust a little bit because you want to have some level of, you're going to speak. If you don't have at least have a few butterflies, you're probably too comfortable when you're going to get up and speak. So that's, again, a really small, and I've got probably other stories as well. But there have been other things where you take a risk, whether it may be small and doesn't turn out so well. And that's okay as far as something not going the way that you want or whatever, but you live and you learn from those. And I think, Doug, you kind of hit on that a few minutes ago. So, Doug, any,
Yeah,
yeah, go
I'll
ahead, sir.
build on what you were both saying, right? Is like, I think you were highlighting there's a risk spectrum from,
Yeah,
taking a small step versus jumping out of a plane and hoping your chute opens. And, I think this whole topic is about kind of building your risk muscle, or your, I don't know, some kind of muscle, as far as getting used to like putting yourself out there a little bit, and then feeling the outcome of putting yourself out there, and hopefully applying a growth mindset to that, to say what went well, what didn't go well when you did your public speaking. Oh, I could have done this a little better, or I should have done that. It's about that growth mindset and learning from taking the risk, whether the risk succeeds or fails. It's that. And everything we're talking about, it's like it's hitting for me sort of being vulnerable and saying I'm putting myself out there, and having a little courage to put yourself out there. And so I have a great example for y'all. I'm building, like, taking a smaller risk to a bigger risk to an even bigger risk is, the fact that we're here doing this podcast is kind of a result of that progression. Because I think, Patrick, you and I at one point started taking a walk on the weekend in the woods or whatever. And as part of that, somehow we shared with each other, hey, I read these different kinds of things on, self help, or mental health, or well being, or meditation, or mindfulness. And so, like, the vulnerability to share a little bit with someone you're, hanging out with is a smaller risk. And then somewhere along the way, we decided, let's record us talking about it. And we were recording it. And I think another sort of step is that we're sharing with each other. And I think we're getting value out of spending time talking about these topics with each other, and we're learning from each other and that kind of thing. But an even bigger risk is actually sharing with people, hey, people that aren't us three, why don't you
yeah,
come watch this and tell us what you think? Like, again, that's that progression of risk, and we're experiencing the newness of doing these things. It's building new neuroplasticity that you should talk about, Patrick. But, like, again, it's that growth through risk and through learning. Because, like, some of our podcasts, they're not great, but we're still learning from them and that kind of thing. So that's my
yeah.
thought.
And I think that that's a great point, Doug. And I was actually thinking about that as well because I remember the conversations that we had. Like, yeah, we should do a podcast and that type of thing. And I can remember even getting a little bit of concern on the trail, like, wow, spread yourself out there, right? And then, and transparently, I think I admired the problem for a long time. The myth of readiness, which is a kind of a key component here, is that we'll do it when we're ready. Like, we got to get some more equipment and get our mic set up and blah, 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 get the lighting all good. And maybe that's not the best subject. Let's discover some other subjects versus it's time to take the risk, put yourself out there. It's going to be a learning experience and you're going to benefit from it, even if it's not perfect to what you described. And going back to the plastic part of it, right, is the neuroscience of newness, right? It's the same circuitry that makes newness scary because it's uncertainty and the brain doesn't like uncertainty, right? It's trying to keep us alive. It also makes reinvention possible, right? So that same concept, if you are able to do things, the growth mindset you mentioned, Doug, exploring new things, building new neural pathways, then this becomes part of the person that you're becoming, your future self. So a lot of heavy topics there.
Real quick question for you, Patrick. You talk
Yep.
about evolution, right? And we're trying to avoid danger. But part of evolution is like this seeking the newness and rewiring your brain. Like, do you know anything about, like, the part of evolution that influenced our brain to always be seeking the newness?
I cannot say that I'm an expert on that particular component of it, Doug, but I will say that those souls or those folks that did take the risk or lean into the newness tended to become the ones that moved humanity forward, right? So the folks that, and therefore you the I'm not talking about a risk taking gene, but the propensity to actually start moving in that direction or and doing things or understanding that this is, you know, being awkward or being uncomfortable is part of life, but you can move forward, allowed those folks that did take risk become the leaders and to discover the new territories and stuff like that. I'll do more research on it though, Doug. That's a good one. Derek.
I just, yeah,
As we
sorry,
were
real
talking,
fast. I read something on that in preparing for this, and I thought I'm going to ask Patrick. So, okay, now we'll let Derek talk.
no, that's great. That's awesome insights and good question. I have to go research that myself. Thanks for the question, Doug. The thing that I'll say is, as we've been talking, I thought about that statement, one small step, one giant leap for mankind. It's in the small step where you take the greatest giant leaps that takes you to where you want to go that makes an influence or difference for yourself or for others. So I would just, as we talk about survival too, like we're all geared to survive, right? And so what I want to paint a little different picture is what if you decided to get uncomfortable with not doing something and you went ahead and did it anyways, and in that you decided to survive through that uncomfortableness to arrive at something new or to explore, discover something new for yourself. And I think that's what you shared earlier, Patrick, about taking on speaking. You were fearful and didn't want to do it, but you, in that uncomfortableness, you decided to do it. So that was your survival. You were going to, when you made that decision to start speaking publicly, you chose to survive through that uncomfortableness to make, to arrive to where you are today. So that was a great, I just wanted to call that out because I think that's a great point that you have to choose uncomfortableness, and in that you survive through that uncomfortableness to arrive at a different place in your life.
Yep, absolutely. So really good points. And I did actually double check on what you asked, Doug. My answer was actually closer than I thought. So, some of the research I just did I double check on one of the neuroscience luminaries that I tend to follow is that the paradox, survival versus expansion, the fact that for most people you want to avoid risk, it keeps us alive. But those that have, the survival or the survival circuit kicking in, but those who can overcome that and lean into it, we are the descendants of those that could do both. Understand the risk, right? Don't take grossly unnecessary risk, but if it's manageable, if you're moving out there, if you're growing, go ahead and lean into it. And those become, or the folks that could do both and stay alive were the folks that we are descended from. So, really good question. And newness does feel good, apparently.
Yep,
And it
it's
can
a
be used to override the fear
positive
response.
kind of dopamine. People, I guess, are harsh about dopamine and seeking dopamine, but this is the good dopamine where it's that new experience that's rewiring your brain and you're growing, right?
Yeah. And this quote hits it specifically. The act of choosing the unfamiliar rewires the brain toward growth.
Mhm.
Quote of the day.
Mm.
Yeah. One other sort of thing I'll put in here um, is I guess, we all have kids. We've all been raising our kids. And one of the things I think we all early on hope for is that our kids will be confident and resilient. And, one way to build sort of resiliency is to continually kind of put yourself out there and take risk. So, when we're taking our kids to a plaything and we're hoping they interact with other kids, like take a risk, hang out with, ask that kid to play or whatever. And then as they obviously grow older, through different experiences, you're like, take that risk, run for class president, or that's a terrible example, but, join the marching band or whatever, take a risk. We're wanting them to take the risks and seek the newness and get a new experience. But we also are like, okay, what if something goes wrong? We want them to build their resiliency to deal with, to, have a growth mindset that, okay, something didn't work out the way I wanted. Let me evaluate like what I could do differently and let me, be able to do it. Cause that's my biggest thing is I hope, myself and my kids and everyone can be more resilient and just deal
Yeah.
with when what you try doesn't work out exactly how you wanted, and you can move on to the next thing and try again, live to try another day.
Yep. Psychological flexibility, which includes resiliency. Totally get it. That would be a good subject for another podcast as well. So, Derek, any last thoughts from you?
I just say, like, if something is worth having in your life, and that having is whatever the life is that you want to create for yourself, then why not just take the leap and go get it? When you stand on the edge of the pool to jump in, most of the time you don't know how to swim until you jump in and just start swimming. So I would just say jump in and start flapping your arms and moving your legs and swim towards what that great life you want to have for yourself and create for your future.
Yep. Yep. And I'll kind of close it out by saying that, curiosity plays a role in this as well. Curiosity always tends to find its way into our discussions. But if you think of it as your survival circuit protects your past, your exploration circuit builds your future. And exploration is curiosity. So the power of your curiosity just keeps giving. Doug, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, just as you're being vulnerable, as you're seeking the newness, as you're learning how to take bigger and bigger risks, be kind to yourself as you go along that journey.
That's correct. Self-improvement is possible. Thank you guys, and we'll talk again soon.
Bye, everyone.